Ethan Khan had not been back to Willow Ridge in 7 long years. 7 years of absence, of silence, of memories left to fester in the corners of his mind. As he drove along the narrow, winding roads of the small town, he could feel the past tugging at him like a shadow he could not shake. The familiar scent of pine, mixed with the damp earth after a light drizzle, brought a flood of memories he thought he had buried long ago. Childhood laughter, summer evenings by the lake, and the quiet streets he once ran through with dreams in his eyes. All of it returned in a sudden rush, overwhelming yet strangely comforting. The town hadn't changed much. The same modest houses lined the streets, some freshly painted, some weathered with age, their gardens a mix of care and neglect. He passed by the little bakery where he and Lila used to sneak chocolate croissants, giggling like children when her mother's eyes weren't looking. The old fountain in the town square was still there, moss creeping along its edges. He remembered how he had kissed her there, a soft, tentative kiss that had felt like forever, even though they were both too young to understand forever back then. Ethan parked his car in front of the old Karim house, the house that had once seemed so welcoming, now standing imposing and almost cold. The white paint had dulled, and the wooden porch creaked slightly under the weight of years. The wind carried a chill, and he pulled his coat tighter around him. Though the weather wasn't particularly cold, it wasn't the wind that made him tense, it was the anticipation. He hadn't seen Lila in 7 years, and yet, the idea of seeing her again after all this time made his chest tighten in a way he hadn't felt since the day he left. He took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching beneath his shoes, and then he saw her. Lila Karim. She stood on the porch, looking out at the street, as if expecting someone. The soft cream dress she wore flowed lightly with the breeze, her dark hair loosely tied at the back. The sight of her made his heart skip, made his mind flash back to every argument, every laugh, every moment they had shared before everything had shattered. She looked almost the same except older, wiser, and somehow more fragile. Time had touched her gently, but it had not healed the wound between them. When her eyes finally met his, she froze. He noticed the way her lips parted slightly, a breath caught in her throat. The wind lifted a few strands of her hair, brushing her face. And for a moment, everything felt like a photograph from the past, frozen in a single frame. Ethan, her voice was barely above a whisper, trembling slightly. Lila, he replied, his voice calm, measured. No emotion, not yet. The distance between them was small, mere inches, yet it felt like a chasm of years, and unsaid words stretched endlessly between them. His eyes searched hers, trying to read the emotions, the fear, the regret, but it was complicated. Layers of life had passed over them, leaving both scars and truths that neither had dared to speak aloud. She took a shaky breath and looked away, toward the house, as if to hide behind it. I didn't expect you to come, she murmured. You invited me, he said softly. His tone was even, calm, but there was a sharpness beneath it, a steel edge that she had never heard before. I don't ignore invitations anymore. For a moment, she said nothing. Her lips quivered as she tried to form a response, but all that came out was a breathy Ethan. He noticed the change in her immediately, the hesitation, the small panic behind her eyes. She was hiding something. He didn't know what it was yet, but instinctively, he knew that the life she had built without him held secrets that he was here to uncover. Her mother's voice suddenly called from inside. Lila, hurry up. We don't want to keep our guest waiting. Guest? The word struck him sharply, though he tried to remain calm. He remembered Nadia Karim well, the sharp-tongued, controlling woman who had always judged him, always doubted his worth, and he remembered exactly why she had despised him. Lila swallowed hard, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her dress. Ethan, come inside, she said softly, almost pleading. He nodded once and followed her up the creaking steps, each one a reminder of all the times he had stood there in the past, once hopeful, once heartbroken, and now wary. The front door opened, and the familiar scent of cinnamon, polished wood, and something faintly floral washed over him. Memories of countless dinners, small celebrations, and tense conversations filled his mind. Inside, the house felt just as he remembered it, warm, yet suffocating, familiar yet alien. Lila led him to the living room, where a few family portraits hung on the walls. He stopped briefly, studying a photograph of Lila as a young girl, smiling in a sunlit garden. Her innocence stared back at him, a stark contrast to the tension that now filled the room. He remembered how happy she had been then, how their love had seemed unbreakable until the night everything fell apart, until the lies, the interference, and the unspoken words had turned their love into silence. Lila's eyes met his again. I wasn't sure you'd come," she whispered. "And I wasn't sure I should," he replied softly. His voice carried the weight of all he had endured, the anger, the longing, and the careful control he had forced upon himself over the years. They moved into the dining room together, where the table was set neatly, candles flickering softly, casting shadows across the polished wood. The atmosphere was tense, charged, as if every object in the room could witness the unspoken confrontation about to unfold. Ethan remembered sitting at this very table years ago, feeling scrutinized, judged, and dismissed. Her mother had always been there, watching, always ready with a comment that undermined him, that questioned his worth. And now, he was here again, calm, controlled, and fully aware that he was walking into a battlefield where no swords were drawn, but where words could wound just as deeply. He noticed Lila's hands trembling slightly, her fingers curling around the edge of the table. She tried to compose herself, taking a deep breath, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her. She was nervous, fearful, and perhaps guilty. Ethan's eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary, studying the subtle changes time had brought. Her once bright, defiant gaze now carried a trace of caution, almost vulnerability. He remembered the night she had stood in the rain, refusing to explain, refusing to stay. The memory was sharp, stabbing at him, as if it had been planted yesterday, not 7 years ago. Her mother's sharp voice suddenly cut through the silence. "I hope you're hungry, Ethan. We don't get many guests these days." Ethan's lips curved slightly, a faint, knowing smile. "I haven't forgotten how much I used to enjoy your cooking," he said softly, his tone almost casual, yet deliberate. Every word carried an unspoken weight. Nadia Karim's eyes flicked to him, sharp and calculating. He saw the subtle judgment, the immediate scrutiny, and he recognized it all too well. She had never believed in him, had never accepted him as worthy of her daughter. And perhaps she never would. Lila tried to interject, her voice soft, almost pleading. "Mom, please," but Nadia was relentless. "Ethan, tell me, what have you done with yourself all these years? Are you the same man who left my daughter 7 years ago, or have you changed? Or is it another disaster waiting to happen?" The words were cutting, deliberate, meant to provoke, meant to belittle. Ethan felt the familiar rush of anger and hurt rise in his chest, but he did not react outwardly. He let the silence hang, letting the weight of her judgment fill the room. He looked at Lila, whose hands were now clasped tightly together, knuckled, white. Her eyes darted nervously between him and her mother. He could see the guilt, the fear, and the hesitation. She was hiding something. That much was clear. But he would not be the one to reveal it, at least, not yet. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate breath, and let the quiet speak for him. The tension in the room was thick, almost tangible, and he could feel the power shifting, inch by inch, as he remained calm, composed, and unreadable. For the first time in 7 years, Ethan Khan felt the control return into his hands, not through anger, not through shouting, not through confrontation, but through silence, observation, and patience. Because he had learned one thing over the years: revenge is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, subtle, patient, and always devastatingly effective. He sat down at the table, his posture straight, his expression composed. Lila sat across from him, her hands still trembling slightly, and he knew, even without a word being spoken, that tonight, nothing would be simple. The past had returned to Willow Ridge. The wounds had reopened. And the storm that had been brewing for 7 years was only just beginning. Ethan looked around the room one last time, taking in the familiar surroundings, the flickering candle, the polished wood, the portraits on the walls, and he let the memories settle like dust around him. He was ready for the questions, for the judgment, for the truth that had been hidden for far too long. And most importantly, he was ready for the reason he had come back. The dining room felt heavier than it had in years. Candles flickered, casting long, trembling shadows across the polished wooden table, and the faint scent of cinnamon and roasting vegetables filled the air. Yet none of the smells or soft light could mask the tension that had settled over the room like a storm cloud ready to break. Ethan Kahn sat straight-backed, hands resting lightly on the table, eyes calm and unreadable, though beneath that calm there was a quiet, simmering intensity. Across from him, Lila Karim's fingers twisted nervously around the edge of her napkin, her eyes darting between him and her mother with a growing unease. Nadia Karim, as sharp and imposing as ever, presided at the head of the table. Her posture was rigid, her fingers tapping a faint rhythm against the stem of her wine glass. She didn't even glance at her daughter, her attention fully focused on Ethan, her piercing gaze as cold and calculating as he remembered. The words that had once cut so deeply in the past were ready to strike again. "You look well," Nadia began, her voice carefully measured, but every word carried the weight of judgment. "I didn't expect you to succeed after leaving my daughter." Ethan didn't react outwardly. He let the silence linger, heavy and deliberate, letting her words echo in the room. He had learned patience over the years. Quick reactions rarely served him well. He had waited 7 years for this moment, not to argue, not to yell, but to observe, to understand, and to prepare. "Life changes people," he said softly, his voice even, calm, almost casual. But beneath the surface was a quiet edge, a steeliness that made Lila flinch. Nadia's sharp eyes narrowed. "Some people change for the better. Some don't." Her words were sharp, deliberate. She had always wielded them as weapons, and tonight she intended to wound again. Lila's fork rattled against her plate. She covered it with her hand, face flushing, trying to remain invisible in the tension that was growing by the second. "Mom, please," she began, but Nadia didn't pause. Ethan let the silence stretch, laying the weight of unspoken history fill the room. He studied Lila, noting every subtle sign of her anxiety, the trembling of her hands, the quickening of her breath, the way her eyes flicked toward him and then away. Something was hidden, something she had kept from him. And he could feel it, pulsing beneath the surface, like a faint heartbeat waiting to be discovered. "You've always judged me," he said, his tone low and deliberate, eyes meeting Nadia's for the first time since they sat down. "Even before I left, even before everything ended. You never saw me as worthy, and now, after all this time, you still want to question me." Nadia blinked, momentarily taken aback by the directness, the calm confidence in his voice, but she quickly regained her composure, forcing a tight-lipped smile that did little to hide the sharpness in her gaze. "It's only natural to ask questions. You left my daughter 7 years ago. Where were you? What did you do with your life? How did you grow? You owe me answers, Ethan." The words struck like knives, deliberate and cutting. Lila's hands tightened around her napkin, her knuckles turning white. She shifted nervously, aware that the secret she had carried all these years was now weighing on the table like a hidden presence, felt but not yet seen. Ethan didn't reply immediately. He let the silence stretch, letting every moment between them thrum with tension. Memories of the past swirled in his mind, 7 years of absence, heartbreak, and unanswered questions. He remembered the night Lila had stood in the rain, drenched, refusing to explain herself, whispering, "Forgive me, please go." And her mother, standing behind her like a shadow, saying, "You're not good enough for him. Leave." He had left, not out of anger, but because he had no choice. And now, sitting here, he could sense that same weight pressing down again. The lies, the secrets, the unspoken truths that had stolen years from him. "I've changed," he said finally, his voice soft but firm, deliberate. "Not just for myself, but because I had to. Life teaches lessons you never asked for, and truths you never wanted to see. I've learned that the hardest part isn't surviving. It's finding the courage to face what you were denied." Lila's hands shook more violently now. She kept her gaze lowered, afraid to meet his eyes. The subtle tremors in her fingers betrayed the secret she had held all these years, the secret that had stolen a piece of his life. Nadia, sensing the pause, leaned forward, her sharp eyes scrutinizing him. "Well, you'd better have answers, Ethan. I expect nothing less. My daughter deserves stability, not disappointment." Ethan's gaze returned to Lila. Noting the fear and guilt in her posture, she had been carrying something far too heavy for herself. The memory of 7 years ago was no longer distant, it had grown roots, and now it was intertwined with every hesitation and unspoken word at the table. "I will give her stability," he said quietly, letting the calmness of his tone press into the room. But not at the cost of hiding truths. Not from her, not from me, and certainly not from the life that should have been ours. Lila's breath hitched, her eyes filled with tears she had been holding back all these years. She looked down at her plate, as if hiding behind it could shield her from the truth he was seeing so clearly. She had tried to protect him, herself, and their son, but he could sense it. The secret was alive, quivering just beneath the surface, and he was ready to confront it. Ethan remembered, vividly, the nights he had spent alone, wondering why she had pushed him away. Wondering what he had done wrong, wondering why the woman he loved had vanished from his life without explanation. And now he realized it had never been about him. It had never been about failure. It had been about control, fear, and secrecy. He let a small pause hang in the room. Every second, every glance, every breath seemed amplified. Nadia's eyes flicked toward him, sharp, calculating, trying to measure his reaction. Layla's body trembled with the weight of anticipation, her fear almost palpable. Ethan let it all settle in, the quiet, the tension, the unspoken word that seemed to hover like dust particles in the candlelight. And then he spoke again, slower this time, letting each word sink in. "I know something you've hidden. Something you've kept from me, from our life. Something that should have been mine." Layla's hands flew to her face. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. "Ethan, He held up a hand. Not to stop her, but to let the moment stretch. He was patient. He had waited years for this confrontation, for this truth to surface. "Not yet," he said softly. "I want to hear it from you, but I can see it. I can feel it. The lies, the withholding, the years stolen from me, it ends tonight." Nadia's sharp features tightened. She sensed instinctively that the control she had always wielded was slipping. Ethan's calm, deliberate presence, and the weight of the unspoken truth was dismantling the power she had held over Lila and the room for so long. Lila's voice finally broke through, trembling, barely audible. I didn't know how to tell you. "I wanted to. But my mother," she said. "She said you weren't ready, that you weren't." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in quiet focus. Every hesitation, every pause, every word she had withheld was now a key piece of the puzzle he had been assembling for 7 years. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, letting the silence fill the space between them once more. The room felt smaller, heavier, almost suffocating with anticipation. The secret hung in the air, tangible, waiting to be revealed. And when it did, it would change everything. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sounds were the faint clinking of silverware, the occasional creak of the floorboards, and Layla's quiet, uneven breathing. Ethan's mind drifted for a moment to the past, the love, the betrayal, the grief, the memory of standing in the rain, powerless, replayed in vivid clarity. And then he turned his attention to the present, to the fragile truth that was now just within reach. He knew that Nadia's confidence was only a veneer, a fragile mask that could crumble under the weight of reality. And he would be there, calm, steady, and inevitable when it did. Because tonight was not just a dinner. Tonight was the beginning of reckoning. The tension at the table had reached its peak. Candles flickered weakly, shadows dancing across the walls, making every movement feel sharper, every glance more intense. Ethan Khan sat straight-backed, his calm exterior masking the storm beneath. Across from him, Lila's hands were trembling violently, her fingers entwined as if holding herself together. Nadia Karim sat at the head of the table, her face pale and rigid, her sharp eyes scanning Ethan with an intensity that suggested both fear and disbelief. Ethan took a slow breath and reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small envelope, thick and crisp, and placed it deliberately on the table in front of Nadia. Her sharp eyes widened. What is this?" she demanded, her voice tight. Ethan's gaze never wavered from Lila's. "Something that belongs to me," he said quietly, almost softly. "Something you tried to hide." Lila froze. Her hands flew to her mouth. Her eyes widened with terror and relief all at once. She knew, even before he spoke, that the truth she had carried for 7 years was about to be exposed. Nadia hesitated for only a second before tearing open the envelope. Inside was a single photograph. She blinked, and then her face drained of color. It was a picture of a little boy, dark hair, soft brown eyes, and a smile that mirrored Ethan's perfectly. A small boy of perhaps 7 years, the same age as the time Ethan had been away. Nadia's voice cracked. You said you told us he isn't yours. You lied. You told us the father left. Ethan's calm eyes held hers. No, I never left a child. I left a lie. I left a story that wasn't mine to tell. But the truth belongs to me and to him. Lila's tears spilled freely now. Ethan, I wanted to tell you. So many times I wanted to, but my mother, she said you weren't ready. She said you weren't stable. She made me hide the pregnancy. She made me end our marriage before you could know. The room went silent except for the faint sound of the candles flickering. Nadia's hands shook as she held the photograph. She had always believed she had control over her daughter, over the family, over the narrative, and now, all of it was slipping through her fingers. Ethan's voice was calm, deliberate, and quiet. You stole 7 years of my fatherhood. You denied me my place in my son's life. But it ends tonight. Nadia's lips trembled. I did what I thought was best. She stammered, panic overtaking her composure. You were poor. You were unstable. I was protecting. Ethan held up a hand, not angrily, not cruelly, but with a quiet authority that made the room feel smaller, more intimate, more inescapable. And now, he asked softly. Now I'm the man whose worth you questioned, while hiding his own son from him. Layla sobbed, burying her face in her hands. Please, don't take him away from me. Ethan's eyes softened briefly when he looked at her. There was love, yes, and pain, but also a clear boundary. I won't take him away. A child needs his mother, he said, voice gentle. But he doesn't need you. The weight of his words struck Nadia harder than any insult or anger could have. She had built a life around control, manipulation, and judgment. And now, all of it was collapsing in front of her. I've already filed for shared custody, Ethan said quietly, letting the finality of it settle in. This time, no one will decide my worth. No one will decide his future, but the people who truly belong in it. Lila reached across the table, trembling, and took Ethan's hand. I'm so sorry, she whispered, tears falling freely. Ethan's gaze softened, not in forgiveness, but in acknowledgement of the pain and fear she had carried alone. I loved you, he said quietly, but love can't survive in the dark. Not when lies and fear are allowed to rule. Nadia's face was pale, almost ghostly. Her hands shook as she clutched the photograph of the boy, the very evidence of the life she had tried to suppress. She had thought she controlled everything. She had been wrong. Ethan stood slowly, his movements deliberate, commanding attention even in silence. The quiet in the room pressed down on them, each second drawn out, and heavy with consequence. He turned his gaze one last time to Nadia. You will never control him. You will never raise him, decide for him, or touch the life that is rightfully his. You took 7 years from me, but you will not take one more day. The words struck her like a thunderclap. She opened her mouth to speak, to argue, to justify herself, but no sound came. The control she had wielded, the power she had believed was hers, was gone. And she knew it. Ethan's eyes softened slightly as he looked at Lila and their son, who had just peeked into the room, curious and innocent. The boy smiled, unaware of the tension that had gripped the adults around him, but his smile mirrored Ethan's perfectly. That smile, that life, was proof of what had been denied, and what had endured. He reached down and lifted the boy gently, holding him close for the first time. Lila's tears fell freely as she watched the moment unfold, a mixture of relief, sorrow, and quiet joy washing over her. Ethan's calm, deliberate voice broke the silence once more. This is what matters, he said softly. Not control, not judgment, not fear, but truth, love, family, and the life that was always meant to be ours. Nadia's face remained pale and shocked. She had underestimated him, underestimated the strength of truth, and underestimated the quiet power of a man who had been denied for far too long. Her sharp tongue, her judgment, her arrogance, they all faltered under the weight of what she could not change. Ethan turned toward the door, his movements slow, deliberate. Lila followed him, taking her son's hand in hers. The room was silent except for the soft footsteps on the wooden floor. As he reached the door, he paused and looked back, locking eyes with Nadia one final time. His voice was soft, measured, but carried a quiet, unforgettable authority. "This time I don't lose anything," he said. "This time, you do." He stepped outside, holding his son gently, leaving Lila by his side and Nadia frozen in a silence that felt heavier than any words could describe. The air outside was cool, carrying the scent of pine and rain, fresh and clean. Ethan inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of 7 years lift from his chest. The past had been faced, the truth had been claimed, and the power of deception had been broken. For the first time in years, he felt free. And for the first time, Nadia Karim truly understood what it meant to panic. The storm of truth had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same.